Hey, Ricky, this is our culture talk here on Mexico. Thank you so much for talking with me today and sharing the craft behind Añejo. And tell me a little bit about you, what you do at the restaurant, and how long it's been there. I know you have more than one location, which is excellent. So I want to hear a little bit more.
Sure, sure. First and foremost, thanks for having me. My name is Ricky Camacho. I'm chef and partner at ANEJO Restaurants. I've been with ANEJO since its inception, helping create the food program as well as the beverage program, in terms of sourcing our spirits and our agave distillates, which has grown immensely from day one to now, which is almost 9 years later. And I'm happy to say that at this point in the game, we've since expanded to 2 locations in New York City and 1 in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And, hopefully still growing despite the climate, but that's the goal. Yeah, Añejo's been quite the ride for me. I can't say, I've been a chef for 20 years. I started out in Asian food. 12 years ago, you couldn't tell me I'd be doing Mexican food. Wasn't on my radar. And then the opportunity came about. And at the time, I was living in a predominantly Mexican neighborhood. So I was having a whole lot of fun researching and getting to know the people and getting to know the culture. And I just kind of took it on and ran with it. And I was having the time of my life. And since then, I've just really, really done everything I can, from going to Mexico once to 2 times a year. Wish I could go more, but it's tough to leave the restaurant so often and for long. I make it a point to get out there with the team. So it's usually me and my partners and some key players on our team, other chefs, beverage directors, and bartenders, and we do some R&D.
Yeah.
And through those efforts, I've been able to immerse myself in the Mexican culture, and keep Añejo growing.
That's excellent. So, I mean, you've been at it for 20 years. The last 9 years, you're behind the helm of Añejo, and you mentioned the culture. So the fact that you really have been immersing yourself. How do you feel that from the beginning, if you go back 9 years to now, that passion has kind of evolved to express the culture through the food and drink? And how do you feel now that you mentioned that you've been, once or twice a year, try to go back or try to go over to Mexico? How do you feel that that's likened to how you see restaurateurs express those things there that you carry through?
Sure. I think, early on, for me, trying to understand the Mexican culture or the Mexican palate and its cuisine, it was very limited, not very different from what we thought Mexican food was, which was just like $3 tacos and, taco truck or cheese laden foods that you'd find in even the most of traditional restaurants where I was living at the time. And still to this day. And it was hard to think, that early on, it was hard to think of Mexico as a country with many states and microclimates and influences within itself, that not everyone ate the same foods.
Mm-hmm.
So as I started to visit Mexico, as Mexican food got more popular and there were awesome chefs out there that were digging into the individual cultures and aspects within the cuisines of the different states of Mexico, it was something that I was also paying more attention to, and traveling there and seeing like, oh wait, you guys eat this here? And I'd never forget my first trip to Mexico and finding basil in markets and finding asparagus in markets and finding, cherry tomatoes, or just things that I wouldn't, right alongside massive, grasshoppers and chapulines. But I was shocked. I was like, I've never been to a Mexican restaurant in New York and eaten asparagus. So what are you guys using this here for? It's not like there's many other people that aren't Mexican going to these markets to buy these products. So who's it for? I've never seen it used. So for me, that was an eye-opening experience. It was like, oh wait, this isn't just, Mexican is so much broader and bigger than whatever we've realized to know that it is. So I started paying more attention, and I started, and this was actually my second trip to Mexico, but this was my first time to Oaxaca. And Oaxaca was where I kind of had my holy shit moment, where I started really paying attention to the food, and I started really paying attention to the chefs, and started going to different restaurants that were chef driven, quote unquote. So they sort of played around with the food a little bit more. They elevated it a little bit more. It started becoming more relevant to me. And it started helping me sort of, because I'm not Mexican, I'm Puerto Rican, so I'm not Mexican. So in a way, I can't ever make traditional Mexican food, and I don't claim to make traditional Mexican food. But early on, it was like, man, this is really tough to stay. I thought, and I found it tough to stay true to what Mexican food was, but to disturb it a little bit, without disrespecting people, or without people saying that, we're not authentic, because in every sense of the word, I always found us to be authentic, because we use authentic ingredients and authentic methods. And I made sure to educate myself about certain things, so that way I felt I was representing it properly. So through these trips to Oaxaca, through my, adventures in eating, and I ate everything and anything.
Yeah.
I never said no to anything. And, I felt like I started feeling better about what I was doing, and the direction I was heading, and the direction I wanted to continue to take ANEJO in as time progressed. So yeah, I'd say ANEJO, at this point has elevated its food, all while paying respect and continuing to pay homage to the Mexican culture.
Yeah, no, I get that sense, and how great that it transcends. So it's like, you immersed yourself in what Mexican culture is, and it's more than food. It's the sights, the sounds, the like you said, the climate, the way that people are, the
love, the interactions, the love, everything they handle, the way the way they treat you, the hospitality. I've also obviously have had the pleasure of not only going out to eat often, but also going to drink. So I visited many a palenque in Oaxaca, and I've gotten, and those are some of my favorite eating trips, because that's usually when the woman of the home is cooking for you, and I'm like, all right, I get to eat some homey food, and always mind blowing, and just seeing the woman and the family in the kitchen and preparing this meal for a bunch of people they don't know or have yet to meet, and they're eager to share, and it felt no different than going to my grandma's home and having her feed me, and you see her standing at the flank waiting to see your facial reaction. Does he like it? Is it good? And you better say something immediately. And that's kind of how it felt in Oaxaca, and you get fed, and they get so happy when they see a smile come to your face, and it's as a chef, it's exactly what you want. You're feeding the VIP, you run up to the dining room, you're hiding somewhere in a corner, and you're watching the person eat, and you kind of want to see that initial reaction, and if it's good, then you feel like you did your job.
Right.
So yeah, the culture as a whole, the music, the people. And they really love when they get to meet people who aren't Mexican, that are so interested and involved in what they're doing, and care so much about what they're doing that they want to learn. And it took me back to my first. So when we were opening ANEJO, I started visiting Mexican groceries, Mexican markets, talking to a lot of the owners of the Mexican restaurants in my neighborhood. And there was this one market that unfortunately has since closed. It was massive. It was right across the street from where I lived. And I'd walk in there, and I started seeing things that to me at that time were foreign, like hoja santa, nopales, pepiche, and just other kinds of Mexican herbs, or dried shrimp powder, and just kind of more sophisticated things that I wasn't used to seeing in Mexican food, because to me at that time Mexican food was like a simple taco or some cheese loaded, you know, enchilada or whatever, which is also good. Not saying it's not, but obviously this place had a different sort of aesthetic idea. And I remember making friends with the owner, older gentleman, and it got to the point where he would see me come in every day, pick ingredients. I would ask him questions, and every day his wife would send him with lunch. And then it got to a point where he would save some of his lunch for me, so that when I would come to the market, he'd be like, "Hey, here, come try this." Like, he would be so happy to just have me taste his food. And he's like, "Here, come try this. My wife made this. I want you to try it." And, you could tell he ate, and there's like a little corner of the Tupperware, and he left it for me to try. And like, that's freaking awesome. Like he was just happy to know that like somebody who wasn't Mexican was taking that much interest in his food, and he wanted to make sure it was well represented.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget that guy. I'll never forget that guy. I'll never forget that experience. And back then, there's no way, if you would have asked me where would ANEJO be in 9 years, I wouldn't say 3 restaurants deep, and a successful concept.
Right. Right. And it sounds like, if you hadn't taken those experiences to heart, there wouldn't be a way for you to have achieved that. So like you recognize that about the Mexican culture and the people and the food and the subtle, like the very subtle things about it that are beyond just the, like you said, like the if we want to say a stereotype of like, oh, a taco or what have you. And so you took that to heart, and now that's your craft. And so you've managed to carry that through. And like you said, pay homage to tradition, but also make it your own and allow people to really get a taste for more than what they consider to be mainstream. So to actually tell me a little bit more about that. So when it comes to like, if you could think, what's really influenced you in terms of, you mentioned Oaxaca's, it was huge for you and sticks with you, but in terms of maybe the recipes or the presentation, maybe something that stuck with you that you feel you carry through in the ways that you do, that you do things now, you know what I mean?
Sure. So often when I do go to Mexico, I always try to come back with, and I always do come back with a few dish ideas. Mm-hmm. Based off of my eating experiences there. And what I try to do is I pay attention to what I'm eating, to what I'm tasting. I ask questions to the servers. Sometimes I'll get lucky to actually speak to the chef or the cook. And I'll bounce my thoughts off of that individual, just kind of not giving any kind of criticism, but just like, hey, is this in there? And like, just trying to get ideas of what's in there, what they're doing, that individual's thought process. And sometimes they're nothing like mine. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they are, mm-hmm. And I think the benefit they have in Oaxaca that I don't, at least not in the city. You go to a place like Criollo in Oaxaca, and it's like you're in a hacienda, and they have their own little house off to the side where they're milling their own masa, and they have chickens walking the property, and they're fermenting things in its own separate little house, and there's a woman just making tortillas, and in New York City I don't have the space for that or the budget. But it's oftentimes just kind of taking those ideas. ANEJO is not fine dining. We're elevated for sure, but we're not fine dining. And what I do is something sticks with me. I remember my first trip to Mexico. I came back with the barbacoa. And it's like, all right, well, I love barbacoa. I want it to be wetter. I want it to be juicier. I want it to be saucier. I want it to be a more intense and chili flavor. Implement adobo into the meat, and it's sort of exactly what at the end of the day, what was on the plate was exactly what I envisioned, and it wasn't what I ate in Oaxaca, but it was my interpretation of what I had. And to this day, it's a great dish. People love it. People say it's the best lamb they've ever had. But when I go to Mexico, my ultimate goal is to say, okay, well, I want to bring back a dish, right? And I want to bring back something that's different. I want to bring back something that people are going to tell me isn't Mexican because they've never had it, they've never seen it. And, you know, an example of that is a soft shell crab dish that I had in Criollo. And sure, to the Mexican from that region or from maybe a coastal region of Mexico, it probably wouldn't come as something new to them. But you give it to a Mexican who's not from a coastal town or who's from the north of Mexico, they might just tell me that's not Mexican, right? And it's like, it's my favorite conversation to have all the time, right? Because I kind of fall in this, if I go to Puerto Rico, they tell me I sound Mexican when I speak Spanish. If I go to Mexico, they tell me I don't sound Mexican. So I belong to no one, right? So I kind of become, I have this saying where I say I'm Puerto Rican from Oaxaca, right? So my dishes kind of take on that same identity, right? And it becomes the same argument. And it's a fun one to have. But at the end of the day, I just want to make good food. So if somebody could taste that dish and they say it's delicious, then I'm willing to have further conversations about where it's from and like sort of justify why it is Mexican versus not. And if it's not, that's fine. But my inspiration for it is Mexican. So, you know, Jesus, I forgot the original question.
No, this is all part of it. I mean, you've essentially, this is where your art comes in. So when it comes to the different qualities that you carry through, I mean, just your experiences, you interpreted that into art, and that became these dishes that became interpretations of what you experienced there. So the barbacoa, like you said, the soft shell crab,
and
influence those.
Sure, and it's not always me. It's not just my travels. I'm now with 3 restaurants. I have an awesome team of chefs. You know, my chef in Philadelphia, he's a Mexican encyclopedia. His name is Willie Hernandez. My chef in Hell's Kitchen, 2 of my chefs in Hell's Kitchen, Juan and Damien, are both Mexican. Juan grows like wild Mexican herbs on his rooftop. And then in Tribeca, it's interesting, right? Because I've kind of been absorbed by Mexican food and culture, thankfully and willingly, I kind of like doing that to people who, right, sometimes you get, especially in this industry, you get cooks that come from other restaurants or the fine dining sector, and they may not know a whole lot about Mexican food, and they may not think Mexican food is worth it because they've never cooked it. They just eaten it, and they've only paid however much money for it. But I'd say in the last 5 to 10 years, obviously that paradigm has shifted. And, you know, it's always fun getting cooks that are used to cooking hoity-toity French food and elevated, you know, Asian food or whatnot. And then they see Mexican food and Mexican ingredients treated the same way. And they have this epiphany where it's like, oh, wow, you could do this with Mexican food as well. And then just seeing these guys or girls and, you know, giving them their first Mexican cookbook or giving them their first task, like their first mission. Hey, I want you to look up this person. I want you to read about this. I want you, you know, any server or cook that walks into the kitchen, I always line up the dried chilies for them and their fresh variants, their fresh counterparts, so that they know, you know, a lot of people don't know it's the same chili. Like a jalapeno and a chipotle are the same thing, and they think it's 2 different things. And I'm like, well, it starts as a jalapeno, but, you know, it's smoked, it's dried, you know, so yes, it's processed to get to that point. But, and you see all these like mini explosions happening in their head, and that's where the interest starts. And they just start getting so engulfed, and that's what happened to me. You know, when I speak to the shop owner, and he tells me that in Jalisco, they use volcanic soil to extract the baba, or like the gooey slime from the cactus, right? So, you know, he's like, that's the key to a cactus salad that's not slimy or that doesn't oxidize as fast. And nobody here is doing that, right? But in Mexico, that they're known to do that. So it's, you know, just having those moments with cooks that will ultimately build the interest, where they develop that respect and see that Mexican food and Mexican cuisine deserves that same level of interest, and ultimately bringing them to this side. So, you know, my chefs help with that immensely. But in Tribeca, it's the only location where the chefs aren't Mexican. But I'm having a ton of fun with them because I get to see all these mini explosions happening in their brains, you know, just every day. And it makes it that much fun. And the team of chefs that are Mexican really enjoy that development with them. So, you know, I'm just creating another bunch of Irish guy from Oaxaca and black girl from Oaxaca. Just like
that love Oaxaca. Mexican culture, exactly. I mean, that should be your life mission. That's the, you know, you would only hope that everyone that walks in your doors walks out with that greater appreciation, you know what I mean, for the cuisine, for the culture, for, and just allowing that to transcend. And you know, I love that story, you know, the respect and the interest and the love for Mexican cuisine. I mean, across all of your locations that you're cultivating that. Going back a little bit to Mexico. So when you've been there, what were some of, aside from the food, obviously, and the study and the, you know, when you bring that, what are some of your favorite things to do? You mentioned the coastal cities, obviously Oaxaca you mentioned. What were some of your favorite things to see and do while you're out there?
Sure. Well, when I go, I have very little time for sightseeing, right? Because I usually load my itinerary with restaurants, with palenques, or distilleries if I'm in Jalisco or Tequila to visit. You know, because in ANEJO we have over 200 agave distillates. So, you know, there's a lot of research that goes into that. There's a lot of scouting that goes into that, a lot of selecting. But I'd say my favorite thing to do up to this point is exploring. Like any moment that I have that's not, you know, planned for me or that I've planned, you know, just exploring, walking out there, making wrong turns. You know, if I'm in a more rural area, and just walking around and seeing what's growing and tasting some things and talking to people and making friends. And if I'm in a more urban or city environment like Guadalajara, same thing. Just kind of see what I could find, you know, see what I could stumble upon, you know, talk to people to kind of get an idea of what you know, each person thinks is their favorite birria spot if I'm in Jalisco or you know, where's their favorite ayuda spot in Oaxaca, and just talking to individuals. But yeah, that's it for me. You know, just you know, if I'm in the fields of Oaxaca, I just love identifying different agaves and finding different things, and you know what fruits are growing alongside them. Yeah,
just really immersing yourself in the, not being a tourist, like being a local, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah. I can't stand the tourist traps. I'm just my first trip to Mexico was to Tequila in Jalisco. And, you know, we were with the tequila company and they were taking us on all these tourist things. And at the time I smoked cigarettes. I don't anymore. But at the time I was. And I was like, you know, I need an excuse to leave. So I'm like, let me go buy a pack of cigarettes. And I'm in the middle of Tequila, small town, 1 in the morning, 1:30 in the morning, no idea where I am. And I see light shining on the sidewalk. I'm like, that must be a bodega, right? I'm from New York City, so I'm used to bodegas. It wasn't a bodega, but they sold cigarettes. And somehow I ended up in there for an hour and a half, giving my partner a heart attack because he had no idea where I went. I just disappeared, and he went out looking for me. And then we ended up staying here and just drinking some weird moonshine with these guys for the remainder of the evening and talking. And, you know, it turned out to be like a variety shop. We sold some shirts, sold some things that probably weren't legal. And, you know, we just kind of sat and talked and had fun with the guy. You know, I think at the end of the day, he thinks he represented his country well, and I like to think that we represented Americans well. So.
Right. Yeah. Well, the fact that like you said, I mean, you immerse yourself. You're not just there to experience things for yourself. You want to know who they are and how their way of life. And, you know, that I feel like you carry that through, just hearing you talk about how you find your inspiration for what you want to, you know, carry through your restaurants and your menu and all of that. And so one last thing that I'm wondering about is, you know, when people walk through the doors of your restaurants, what do you feel mostly transports them? I mean, is there, you know, what about the ambiance or the way that you've decided to, you know, carry
Sure.
that?
Yeah, absolutely. So añejo obviously means aged, right? And in the design elements of the restaurant, we make sure to use lots of reclaimed wood. You know, all of our bar tops are concrete with, you know, light coatings, so they look very natural. We use earth tones, and then there's like small highlights of opulence, whether it's some gold metal or crystal chandeliers or whatever it is. And to me,
Mm-hmm.
it's very much Mexico. It's almost like walking into a barrel aging room, you know, in a palenque or in a distillery. And, you know, a lot of parts of Mexico for many could seem to be rough or rustic. And then you just, you know, Oaxaca was one of my favorites, where the art scene there is insane. It is incredible. And, you know, 1 hour we're in the fields, you know, getting dusty, dirty, and drunk, searching for agaves. And then the next, you're just walking in this beautiful city with beautiful art pieces and awesome graffiti. And that's kind of like what Añejo's like. Like, there's especially the Tribeca location where we have 2 floors, so we had a bigger canvas to sort of have fun with, and transport people. You know, so we have the downstairs dining room, and it's almost, you know, you're walking down almost into a barrel aging room, and we even have a portion of that area where we have tequila barrels, and we sort of replicate that experience. Um, but you know, throughout that sort of darkness and the unknown, and you know,
Yeah.
we keep lights dim on purpose. You know, you'll get introduced to you know, beautiful candelabra, beautiful cast iron gates, or brass, you know, brass fixtures, or
Mm-hmm.
you know, and for me it's kind of, you know, when I go to La Teña in Jalisco, you go down into the barrel aging room, and it's a lot of brick and a lot of wood and exposed pipes. And then you go upstairs to their tasting room, and it's this beautiful dining table and a little chandelier and pieces of art, and it's, you never know you're in the same space. And
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like, you know, it's what we try to introduce. It's almost like elevated rusticity, if you will.
Yeah, yeah, but see, that's all part of the inspiration that, I mean, you've had such wide experiences. You're not just, I mean, it's true art. You've carried that through your locations, through, I mean, I could just picture what it would be like to experience that, and then also have that reflect your own experiences of just traveling. So it's really beautiful that you all were very intentional about that. Wow. No, that's, I mean, what a great story, and how beautiful that, like I said, you know, the respect, the interest, the love for Mexican cuisine that you and your team of chefs have, that you carry through, and, you know, from food to the spirits and I mean, the whole thing, just all of that, that they get, you know, people coming to see you can experience. So thank you so much for sharing that story with us. And I want to encourage everyone to come out and see you and get that experience for themselves, and really see what Mexican culture is all about through your restaurants. Thank you.
Thank you so very much.